Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. Niccolò Machiavelli. Right now, someone is living rent-free inside your head. Maybe it's the person who disrespected you last week, the colleague who undermined you in a meeting, the friend who stopped responding, the critic online who dismissed everything you've built. And here's the worst part. While they're going about their day completely unbothered, you're the one replaying the conversation at 2 a.m., rehearsing everything you should have said. That ends today, because in the next 20 minutes, you're going to learn something that Machiavelli understood 500 years ago, something that the most powerful, most psychologically unshakable people in history have always known, and something that most people go their entire lives without ever grasping. Your attention is not free. It is the most expensive thing you own, and you've been handing it out to people who haven't earned it. Let's change that. Imagine you discovered a small cut on your arm that you never noticed. Nothing dramatic, nothing severe, just a slow, consistent bleed that's been draining you for years. That's exactly what's happening to most people's power. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in hundreds of small daily moments where they hand over their most valuable resource without even realizing it. Every time you respond to someone who doesn't deserve your words, you bleed. Every time you explain yourself to people who have already made up their minds, you bleed. Every time you chase someone who walked away, check your phone for a response that isn't coming, or lose sleep over what someone thinks of you, you bleed. And the tragic irony? The people consuming your energy aren't even thinking about you. They've moved on. You're the one who stayed behind, paying the bill for an argument that ended hours ago. Machiavelli wrote something in his private letters that most scholars overlook. He wasn't just writing about armies and political strategy. He was writing about something far more fundamental, the internal state of the man behind the strategy. He observed that the rulers who fell were not always the ones with fewer resources or weaker armies. They fell because they could be moved. They could be provoked. They could be pulled out of their strategic clarity by emotions they never learned to govern. He called it the most dangerous vulnerability a ruler could have, not an external enemy, but an internal one. The unexamined need to react, the compulsion to respond, to defend, to explain, to chase. Think about that in your own life. How much of your energy today was consumed by things that didn't deserve it? How many hours have you spent this week on situations that, if you're honest, you should have simply walked away from? The first step toward power is not learning what to do. It's learning what to stop doing. And the most important thing to stop doing is reacting to everything. The psychology behind why you react. Here's something that will completely reframe how you understand your own behavior. You are not reactive because you're weak. You're reactive because you're human. From the moment you were born, your brain was being trained by a very consistent lesson. Reaction creates outcome. You cried, and someone came. You reached, and something arrived. You responded to the world, and the world responded back. This wasn't a flaw in your programming. For a helpless infant, it was survival intelligence. The problem is, you're no longer an infant. But those neural pathways are still there, firing with the same urgency, applying prehistoric survival logic to your modern social life. This is why someone not replying to your message can feel like a physical threat. Because neurologically, it activates the same brain regions as a physical threat. Research from UCLA confirms it. Social exclusion and physical pain are processed in identical areas of the brain. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between being ignored by a colleague and being abandoned by your tribe in the wilderness. It responds to both with the same alarm. Now, here's where this becomes strategically important. The people who understand this about you can use it against you. Every time someone provokes you and you react, they've confirmed something critical. They have access. They have a lever. They can affect your emotional state from the outside. And once someone knows they have a lever, consciously or unconsciously, they will use it. The Stoics had a concept for this. They called it the dichotomy of control. The idea is simple. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. What other people do, say, and think about you, not within your control. How you choose to respond to what they do, say, and think, completely within your control. Machiavelli took this further. He wasn't just interested in inner peace. He was interested in power. And he recognized that the man who masters his responses doesn't just feel better. He positions himself better. He becomes strategically unpredictable. He becomes harder to manipulate. He becomes, in a very practical sense, more dangerous. Because you cannot control the man who controls himself. What happens when you go silent? Now I want to walk you through something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but it's important for you to understand. Because understanding it protects you. And it also explains why strategic silence is one of the most powerful tools you will ever develop. When you stop reacting to someone who expects your reaction, something very specific happens in their brain. Their mind enters what neuroscientists call a state of social uncertainty. And the human brain, which is wired for prediction and pattern recognition, does not handle uncertainty well. Think about how a slot machine works. The reason people become addicted is not the winning, it's the unpredictability. When rewards come consistently, they become expected. When they stop, the brain intensifies its seeking behavior rather than accepting the loss. It doubles down. It replays. It obsesses. When you withdraw your attention from someone who had it, the same mechanism activates. They don't just move on. They replay every interaction, trying to identify what changed. They rehearse conversations they wish they'd had. They craft messages they may never send. They find themselves thinking about you more in your absence than they ever did when you were present. You have become a question they cannot stop trying to answer. And here's the profound thing about this. You're doing nothing to create this effect. You are simply removing your engagement. The obsession is self-generated by their own psychology. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect. Our minds are programmed to be more preoccupied with incomplete experiences than with completed ones. When you withdraw without explanation, without the ritual of closure, you leave an open loop in their mind that their brain will work tirelessly to close. This is why Machiavelli advised that the most devastating response to an enemy is not retaliation. It is irrelevance. Make them feel that they are beneath the threshold of your awareness, and you have struck them at their deepest psychological vulnerability, the fear of not matching. But I want to be very clear about something here. This knowledge is not permission to be cruel. Understanding why silence affects people is not a license to use silence as a weapon of punishment or emotional cruelty. It is knowledge that protects you. It helps you recognize when this dynamic is being used against you, so you can remain unmoved. And it helps you understand why disengaging from toxic or depleting dynamics isn't cold or wrong. It's strategic and ultimately healthy. The goal is never to cause harm. The goal is to stop absorbing it. The 5 people draining your power. Let's get specific. Because stop reacting to undeserving people is easy to say and difficult to do, especially when you're inside a situation and not sure whether your engagement is warranted. Here are the 5 types of people who are most likely draining your attention right now. Learning to recognize them changes everything. The first type is the provocateur. This is the person who makes pointed comments, asks loaded questions, and positions every interaction to generate a reaction from you. They may not be malicious. Some provocateurs simply operate from a deep need to feel influential, and getting a reaction from you confirms that influence. The key thing to understand about provocateurs is that they need your reaction to function. Your irritation, your defensiveness, your attempt to correct the record, these are all wins for them. The moment you react, you've confirmed that they have power over your emotional state. The only response that actually defeats a provocateur is genuine disinterest. Not performed indifference, that's still a reaction. Genuine disinterest. The kind where their provocation simply fails to compete with what you're focused on. The second type is the chronic drainer. This person is not malicious either, but every interaction leaves you exhausted. They're in constant crisis. Every conversation circles back to their problems. They need your advice, your validation, your emotional labor, and it is never enough. What makes the drainer particularly difficult to disengage from is that they look like someone who needs help. And most compassionate people are conditioned to respond to need. But there is a difference between genuine need and a pattern of helplessness that feeds on other people's energy. Recognize the difference. Compassion is not the same as allowing yourself to be consistently depleted. The third type is the disguised competitor. This is the most dangerous one on this list because they're hiding in plain sight. They appear as friends, colleagues, supporters. They congratulate you warmly. They offer helpful advice. But watch carefully and you'll notice. They remember your failures with unusual clarity. They subtly undermine your confidence at strategic moments. They always seem to be positioning themselves slightly against you while maintaining the language of alliance. Machiavelli was direct about this type. He said an open enemy is far less dangerous than a false friend, because you guard against enemies but trust allies. The disguised competitor exploits trust to gather intelligence about your vulnerabilities, then uses that intelligence at the moment it causes maximum damage. The response here is not dramatic confrontation. It is information control. You keep the surface warmth while radically limiting what you reveal. They know the version of you that you've decided they should know. Nothing more. The fourth type is the noise generator. This person doesn't target you specifically. They simply produce drama, conflict, and complexity wherever they go. And if you're not deliberate, you'll find yourself being pulled into their orbit, commenting, opining, taking sides, managing fallout. Every minute you spend on someone else's noise is a minute stolen from your signal. The response is simple: minimum engagement, maximum focus on what you came to do. The fifth type is the validation seeker. This one is subtle because responding feels generous. The validation seeker needs your approval, your confirmation, your consistent reassurance. Giving it seems kind, but what happens over time is that you become their emotional infrastructure. And when your approval is someone's primary source of psychological stability, your withdrawal of that approval, even briefly, even for good reason, becomes a crisis. You've inadvertently given them leverage over you through your own generosity. Manage this with measured, consistent warmth. Never enough to become someone's sole source of self-worth. Building the discipline. Understanding all of this intellectually is one thing. Living it is another. So let's talk about how you actually build this discipline, practically, progressively, in real situations. The foundation is what I call the gap practice. Right now, for most people, the gap between stimulus and response is essentially zero. Someone sends a message, you reply immediately. Someone makes a pointed comment. You respond before you've even consciously processed what they said. Someone doesn't respond to you. Your anxiety spikes before you've taken a single breath. The entire practice of strategic indifference is about expanding that gap, creating space between what happens to you and what you do about it. Because in that space, even if it's only a few seconds, choice becomes possible. And choice is everything. Here's how to build it practically. Start with small provocations. Not the big ones, not yet. Start with the minor daily irritations. The unnecessary comment, the passive-aggressive message, the situation at work that used to reliably pull you in. When you feel the familiar pull to react, pause. Take a slow breath. Let the urge rise, don't suppress it. Just observe it. Note that it's there, that it feels urgent, that it's demanding action. Then sit with it for 30 seconds without acting. Most of the time, you'll discover the urgency was manufactured by your nervous system, not by the actual circumstances. The situation didn't require your intervention. The urgency was biological, not rational. Each time you successfully create that gap and choose not to react, you're building what neuroscientists call inhibitory control. The actual neural pathway for choosing your responses rather than being driven by them gets stronger with every repetition. The second practice is asking one specific question before every response that carries emotional charge. Not, is this fair? Not, do I have the right? Not, will I feel better if I say something? The only question is, does engaging with this serve my actual objectives? If the honest answer is yes, if this is a moment where engagement genuinely advances something that matters, then engage with full deliberateness. If the answer is no, if responding merely satisfies an emotional need without advancing your real interests, then don't. Over time, this single question rewires your default decision-making process. You stop operating from emotional reflex and start operating from strategic intention. The third practice is what I call the purpose anchor. Every act of strategic indifference must be in service of something. You're not just saying no to undeserving things. You're saying yes to something more important. When you have a goal that genuinely compels you, something you're building, developing, pursuing with real intention, then the noise of other people's provocations simply cannot compete for your attention. You're too occupied with what matters to be available for what doesn't. This is the most sustainable form of indifference, not the forced, performative kind that requires constant effort to maintain. The kind that emerges naturally from a life so full of meaningful direction that lesser things simply fall away. The social architecture of power. Here's something that most discussions of personal power miss completely. The consistent practice of strategic indifference doesn't just change how you feel. It changes how others perceive and treat you. Not because you've performed something different, but because you've become something different. Every human social environment operates according to informal power dynamics. And those dynamics are governed largely by visible signals about who needs what from whom. The person who needs the room's approval enters with a structural disadvantage. Their need is visible in how they speak, how they position themselves, how they respond to others. And that visibility makes them manageable, because when others know what you need, they know what to withhold to control you. But the person who genuinely does not need the room's approval, their social position shifts automatically. People are slightly more careful, slightly more respectful, slightly more curious. Not because power has been asserted or status has been claimed, but because the signal of non-neediness communicates something that people instinctively respond to. Think about the most genuinely powerful people you've encountered in your life. Not the loudest or the most aggressive, but the ones who carried a quiet authority that you could feel before they said a word. They had this quality in common. They didn't seem to need anything from you. Their sense of self wasn't contingent on your approval. This is the social architecture of genuine power. And it's built not by learning new behaviors, but by releasing the old ones. The need for constant validation, the compulsion to explain, the reflex to react, the desperation to be understood. Release those, genuinely, through practice, through the building of real inner sufficiency, and the external world reorganizes itself around you accordingly. The final transformation. Let me bring everything together with the most important idea in everything we've covered today. Machiavelli's most enduring insight was not about how to control other people. It was about what happens when you stop needing to. The prince who needed nothing from others, whose confidence was internally generated, whose stability was not at the mercy of anyone's opinion, whose focus could not be hijacked by provocations or pulled away from purpose by the noise of the world. That prince was genuinely untouchable, not because nothing could reach him, but because nothing unworthy of his attention could get his attention. That is the distinction that matters. The reactive man ignores people to punish them. He's still organized around them, still thinking about them, still making decisions based on them. He has simply changed the shape of his engagement from reaction to deliberate avoidance. He is still, in the most important sense, controlled. The sovereign man, the man who has done the genuine work of building inner sufficiency, ignores most things because he is too fully occupied with building his life to give them space. He is not running away from the noise. He has built something worth running toward. That is the kingdom within that Machiavelli pointed at and the Stoics described, and every genuine master of the self has ultimately discovered. A life so deliberately constructed, so purposefully directed, so internally rich that external disturbances simply cannot find purchase. This doesn't happen overnight. It is built through thousands of small daily choices. Every time you feel the pull to react, and choose your purpose instead. Every time you sense the familiar urge for approval and return your attention to what you're building. Every time you let the noise be noise while you continue the work. Each of those moments is a brick in the structure. Each repetition reinforces the architecture. And over time, brick by brick, choice by choice, you construct something that no provocation, no critic, no manipulation, and no need for external validation can touch. Your attention is your power. Your reactions are your vulnerability. And the distance between who you are today and who you could be is exactly the space between those two truths. Start building that distance today. Start right now. Start with the next small choice. Because that's where it always starts. And that's where the transformation has always been waiting. If this video made you think differently about how you direct your attention and your energy, let me know in the comments. Tell me the one idea that hit hardest for you today. If you want more content exploring the psychology of power, strategic thinking, and Machiavellian philosophy applied to real modern life, subscribe and make sure notifications are on. Every week we go deeper. I'll see you in the next one.